I say common, you say ground. Common.
Ground.
Common.
Ground.
It is so great to see all of you here, new people who have been to a lot of our events over the last 3 years. New people who have not been to our events a lot. You can tell I'm nervous. And former folks who have been returning supporting for the last 3 years. My name is Ronald Towns, and I am one of the proud co-founders of Camp Common Ground.
My name is Zach Bell. I'm the other very proud co-founder and co-director with Ron.
Thank you. And tonight is actually our first time doing this type of event, a community roundtable, where we actually surface the issue of why we were founded in the first place. And I know that all of us, come from different sectors. Some of us are educators, some of us are in the foundation world, some of us are in housing, youth development, policy, or none of those. But we all are gathering here because we care about this really important issue that has been surfaced in the media over the last few years. But this is the first time, to our knowledge, that it has really been where a group of people have intentionally come together to actually not only talk about it, learn about the challenges, but also try to develop some action steps that we can do as a community to move the work forward. Tonight we're gonna start with a little bit about why we're here, a little bit about our experience. Then we're gonna share a little bit about the research of what is going on in the Bay Area right now to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we're gonna hear from an incredible group of panelists who are in the work and are gonna help us understand what are the challenges and give us some guidance on what are some of the potential solutions to this issue of school and community segregation. So 5 years ago, I moved here from Chicago, and I've only been to Oakland for, 5 years ago. And I actually moved to work here at Envision Academy. So I taught 9th grade Algebra 1 and Math and Enrichment with Mr. Patnod, Dustin. 5 years ago, moved all the way from Chicago. When I moved here, one of the first students who I met was Kevin Sanchez. And Kevin is now, he is a senior at Envision, and I'm very proud of him, but Kevin was a trip. Kevin, not only did I have him in Algebra 1 class, Math Intervention class, but I also have him in my advisor. So I saw Kevin 3 hours a day, which for a high school teacher is a lot of time. And one day, Kevin came into advisory, and I was just like, in advisory, if you've ever been to school, advisory is like where you check in with kids, that social emotional stuff. And I was like, Kevin, how was your weekend? And he was like, Towns, it was not that great. And I was like, well, what's not great about it? He was like, Towns, well, I thought about the event that we're all preparing for. So let me give some background. Our advisory was a program called Build. And so we were going to an event where we were competing against kids from around the Bay Area, most of whom are not at urban schools. And so at this particular event, most of the kids were gonna be at private schools, and mostly gonna be white and Asian students. And this school, Envision, serves all Black and Latino students, mostly from low-income backgrounds. So Kevin was telling me after weeks of preparing, we have been doing this for weeks, months, and he was like, Towns, I'm not going. I was like, Kevin, and if you know me as a teacher, that strikes a bell. I'm like, what do you mean you're not going, Kevin? Of course you are. And he told me something that I will always remember, both as an educator, but also just as a human, is I'm not going because I know what they're gonna think about me. I know they don't expect me to do well, so I'm not gonna set myself up for failure. And what Kevin was saying, Kevin is Mexican American, and what he was saying was his perception was that the white other students and community that was gonna be there in particular, they already viewed him as not as competent, not as capable, and so he wasn't gonna put himself through that. And my only response, I was a little bit shocked, because as a teacher, you're like, oh, when a kid says that, you kind of want to wrap your arms around them, but you're not really sure what to say, so you just come up with something to say in the moment that sounds good. And what I said in that moment was, Kevin, that's not true. Let me tell you, I have a lot of white friends, and they don't think that way. And I said, Kevin, I have developed great relationships with people who are white, and I know that they think of me equally as they would you. Something like that, to kind of move him forward. He eventually ended up going to the event, etc. That was not a satisfactory answer, and here's why for me it wasn't. As a Black man, and as someone who grew up on the west side of Detroit, I'm not from Oakland, as I said, what Kevin was saying resonated with me, because that was the same thing that my mother and my aunt and the woman who raised me had told me in my household 20 years earlier. And they had told me that, you know, you have to be better just to be considered average because they are going to not view you as the same. You're gonna have to prove yourself. Do not bring a white person home to date. Do not, like, those were words that came in my house and of the households of my black friends and a lot of the students who I serve. For me, as one of the directors of Camp Common Ground, I know that there are many kids who look like me who are having those same conversations in their household, and those are their experiences that are real. And what we've tried to think about is, how do we bring kids together intentionally, given that our schools are so segregated, so they're not meeting people from different backgrounds in their schools or communities? How do we have them build meaningful relations across cultural lines so that they can move past the stereotypes that they're receiving in their homes and communities?
One of the things that I really love and feel was so powerful and special about this work is that it matters who you are and your identity. You bring that into this work. And Ron and I have different perspectives on why we came into this, and we talk about it all the time. For me, I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, Jewish family, upper middle class. And even though I didn't receive necessarily like negative messages explicitly about other groups, I definitely had very clear messages of who is in my community and who is not. I was sent to Jewish summer camp for 10 years, which I loved, but was a very intentional effort. My dad told me he was sending me there so I would meet a Jewish girl to marry. I was like 8. And in high school, they wouldn't let me date someone who wasn't Jewish. I fortunately grew up in a city and felt, you know, more comfortable than some other folks might. But when I got to UPenn in Philadelphia, which is there, it felt like the racial tensions and the discomfort was at a different level. And Penn has a historically bad relationship with West Philadelphia, predominantly an historically black community. A lot of folks have been displaced as it expanded further west. And actually even the neighborhood used to be called Black Bottom, was then renamed University City. So there was a displacement and erasure, right? And what was so difficult too was that the messaging was very clear from Penn. We actually had to, during orientation, watch a video about a Penn student from like 10 years before who had been shot when she was in West Philadelphia, not fatally, but it was this very clear message of don't go past 40th Street, they are dangerous, they are different, they're not part of our community. And so I felt like for those 4 years I walked and watched interactions like, it sort of felt like I saw this on repeat, some, you know, like an affluent white kid on his way to a frat party stepping around or over a homeless black person. Obviously that exact scenario didn't happen every time, but that's what it felt like being there. And I didn't know what to do. I was probably self-righteous and was like, this is wrong, because I just knew something wasn't right there. Because to me, for that to make sense, it has to be in a world where you don't view that person as fully human, or at the very least, not in your community. And then when I started working in schools, I was at University City High School my junior year summer, which has now been shut down. And I became close with this high school student, Martez. He was only a few years younger than me because I was in college. And he was really likable and social and athletic, but was pretty quiet around academics. And we were doing a final project, and it was the first time I'd seen him write. And he wouldn't start writing. And he finally started putting out like a sentence, and it was honestly very hard to understand and hard to read. And in that moment, my mind went, this black boy is lazy. Or he's just dumb. And realizing myself that this is a boy I even really liked, and I'm a well-intentioned white person. These are not things that are easy to deconstruct. And so I thought in my head, like, how can we have a situation where we actually construct those differently, and where that, whether it's that person on the street or Martez or whatever, where it's not an other, but someone who really feels like part of our community. And one last thing I'll say is that something that also happened as I got older was there was someone from my Jewish community who really did struggle, who got kicked out of multiple schools, had substance abuse issues, was in trouble with the law, and people in our community gave him second, third, fourth, fifth chances because he was one of us. And we weren't going to abandon them. And I just wondered what would be required for people to feel that way about people who don't look like them, aren't technically in their community. And so that's, I feel like, where Camp Common Ground came from for me. And I feel so honored to be able to do it with Ron.
Same here. Well, we're gonna.